Welcome everyone. My name is Danielle Cook and I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the Hopkinton Public Library, and I would like to welcome you to our local author talk tonight. Tonight we have Janis Daly. She is here to talk to us about her book, The Unlocked Path. Please welcome Janis.
Thank you, Danielle, so much. Thank you.
And thank you to our camera operator, Mike, as well. So streaming on with other community members of the beautiful town of Hopkinton. I'm glad I'm here today and not Monday. That's probably a good scheduling choice. So here to just chat with you a little bit tonight about how and why I came to write my debut historical fiction, The Unlocked Path. Mainly because I have no writing background. I never aspired to be an author or journalist, but it was actually while I was doing some genealogy research that an idea came to me. So I have on the screen two portraits of some of my ancestors. The first one I'll introduce you to is the woman on the right, Elizabeth Pierce Elliott Robinson. So she is my paternal grandmother that I never knew. She passed before I was born, but I always felt some type of a kinship to her. She had that beautiful red hair, and I had or still have after an appointment at Mirror Image Salon, the red hair gene. She had two older brothers and two sons. I have two older brothers and two sons. And I just was always curious about her, but unfortunately never took enough time when I was younger to ask my dad about her. My dad passed when I was 29, so still a little young to start to appreciate family history. So as my youngest son was getting ready to graduate college, and I'm thinking, okay, now what am I gonna do with my extra time on my hand? Both my boys played even college level sports, so still involved with going to all their games. I decided, you know what, I'm finally gonna look in and see if I can learn anything more about my grandmother Robinson. So I started down the holes and tunnels and paths of genealogy research and found this gentleman on the left, who is her grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, William Shannon Pierce. And it was learning more about him that inspired my idea for a book. So what did I know about my grandmother? I knew she came from Philadelphia originally, and that she was a debutante. She came from a well-to-do family, and her grandfather, Pierce, was a judge. I didn't even know his first name. I just knew Pierce was a family name, loved it. My oldest son is named James Pierce and goes by Pierce. But how and why she got from Philadelphia to Boston and met my grandfather, who was from Newton, and got married at the ripe old age of 32, old maid in 1912. And she was an attractive woman, so mysteries. And married and promptly had two sons, my uncle and my dad. So I had that beautiful portrait of her that my dad had given to me. It was always on my bureau growing up, but that was the only photo or picture we had of her in the house until I was cleaning out my parents' house. Only daughter, guess whose job that falls on. And I found this picture in a small box in my dad's bureau. And I'd never seen it before. Immediately showed it to my brothers. They'd never seen it before. But it's obviously a picture of his parents, my grandparents. And from the style of dress, and there was a small caption handwritten on the back that said, "Now touring the southern states." I'm guessing it's 1912 and they're on their honeymoon. Although even on their honeymoon, they don't look that happy. And that's because they ended up separating. Well, my dad was actually quite young, only 4 or 5 years old, and then waited almost 20 years before formally divorcing. Of course, divorce was a taboo back then, and a woman particularly could lose everything She could lose her house, she could lose her children, she could lose any financial support. So she waited until my dad graduated college, and then she passed away in 1957. So more mysteries, why the separation? Why a separation for so long until the divorce? So as I, started to Google her name, I'm not finding much. I am fortunate that I know a lot about my grandfather Robinson. He was quite the Renaissance man. He was a Harvard-educated lawyer. He ended up being the secretary to a Massachusetts congressman in DC. He was an artist. My brothers and I have beautiful watercolors and oil paintings of his throughout our homes. And he was a novelist. So he wrote in the romance genre in the 1910s and 1920s. And I found this article that I'd never seen before online for Book News Monthly about his most recent release in 1916 called Man Proposes, set in Newport with all the tennis set and all back then. But there was a tiny mention of my grandmother's name. So that's why it came up in my return search. And it mentioned her name. They spelled Pierce wrong. It's P-E-I-R-C-E. From Philadelphia, the daughter of an English banker, which is kind of boring. But it mentioned her grandfather, the Judge Pierce. And not just that he was a judge, but he was an abolitionist judge. So all of a sudden, I am like, okay, wait a minute, this sounds really interesting that I have an ancestor involved in the abolitionist movement. So can't find anything else about my grandmother. She never worked outside the home, apparently wasn't involved in any organizations. So I said, okay, I'll put you aside for the moment. Let's check out your grandfather, William Shannon Pierce. And I discovered a lot of information on him. That he was much more than a judge. I found this portrait online. It's actually now in the archives of the Hollis Law Library at Harvard. It was commissioned in Philadelphia for the 1876 centennial celebration there, of famous Philadelphians at the time in 1876. And then I started to dig some more, and learned that his work in the abolitionist movement extended as far as him becoming the defense lawyer for the runaway slaves who were captured and tried under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which meant, of course, if they were captured and lost their case, they were sent back to their owners down south. So he defended those slaves, in and against many of his peers in the legal counsel work, as well as his neighbors and friends. But I was quite proud of that he felt like there was a need to defend the rights of the runaway slaves. I was fortunate. I took a trip to Philadelphia for some firsthand research and found the family plot in Laurel Hill Cemetery, northeast of Philadelphia, the nice large granite stone with many of the names of the family listed. And I had also found from online census reports for Philadelphia that there were actually 7 daughters and 1 son. Poor George, right smack in the middle of those 7 sisters. And the cemetery also listed 3 other infants that had died. So 10 children altogether. So, an amazing family, a full family. I even found where they lived, downtown Philadelphia, right up near where the Art Museum looks out to. And another mention I found of him was he took great delight in discussing various phrases of the Old Testament. And I am not a student of the Bible, but right on the grave marker, just listed under his name, is a quote from Song of Solomon 2:17, "Until the day dawns and the shadows flee away." And I made note of that because those words just struck me. You know, here I am studying history and the shadows of history and trying to unearth, you know, some new information. So I jotted that down, and it actually came into play into the book and the theme of the book. Another obituary and eulogy given about him by one of his co-counsels was noting that his daughters were women of character and intellectual training. So those 7 daughters must have been very well educated. And he believed, obviously, in the rights of women to be educated, because that was not something you heard spoken about in women in the 1860s, 70s, 80s. So I'm just falling in love with this great-great-grandfather, and it was actually the final sentence in an entry from Famous Americans that I found the one line that totally blew me away. He took an active part in founding the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. So, believed in the rights of others, including for women to be educated in whatever field they wanted to be educated in. And of course, you know, women were denied admission to most medical schools in the 1800s. So, a women's medical college. I had never heard of such a thing. So now I'm shifting my research again and wanting to learn more about those strong and brave and determined women that wanted to study medicine. So I found, it was originally founded in 1850 as the Female Medical College, changed quickly over to Women's Medical College, and ended up being the longest running women's only medical school in the country, 120 years until they started to admit some men in 1970. And then they eventually finally merged with Drexel University in Philadelphia. But just amazing to know that such a thing existed. Shortly after the one in Philadelphia opened, one here in Boston opened, the New England Medical School that merged much, much earlier with Boston University. And then New York had a medical school founded by Elizabeth Blackwell, who was the first woman doctor in the country. So why am I so interested in this college? Well, because I went to a women's college myself. Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts, at the time I graduated, was still all women. It has since gone co-ed. But, you know, I knew immediately of that very strong and supportive environment that was available for women in higher education, in that all women surroundings, and the relationships that form between the students and the faculty, staff, and alumni. So I decided, you know what? I have read a lot of historical fiction. It's my favorite genre. And I had never heard of these women doctors at the turn of the century. And so I decided, I'm going to write a book. Why not? You know, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? So down the rabbit hole I went into even more research to learn all that I could, not only about the school, but more importantly, the students and graduates. Who were those brave women who had such a calling to study medicine and become doctors when only about 5% of all doctors in the country were women? And one of the first women you meet when you're starting your research is actually a woman from India, Anadubai Gopal Joshi. And her story is nothing less than amazing. She was the first woman to come from India to earn a Western medical degree. And of course, that's the slight distinction, because women have been healers and midwives forever. But it was that right to be called a doctor by holding a degree in their hands that was going to make the difference. So Anadubai is from the upper castes of India in the mid-1800s, and very typical of her culture and caste, she is placed into an arranged marriage when she's 9 years old to a man 20 years older than her, and ends up having her first son at the age of 14, who dies within 10 days. And, you know, she's barely a child herself. And to go through that type of trauma, of losing her child, she took that overwhelming grief and she turned it into anger, and she turned it into purpose, that she wanted to study medicine. And she wanted to make sure that what happened to her son and the lack of care she received herself wouldn't happen to other women. So she is very lucky that that old man husband supported her decision. And together they researched and they found Women's Medical in Pennsylvania. They found a sponsor to advocate for her admission. And so she entered in 1884 at the age of 18. You could enter without an undergraduate degree, and right up until sometime in the 1890s was when that started to change. You just needed, your application, your records, transcripts from secondary education, high school, whatever, and you had to pass a test, an entrance exam. So I'm meeting Anna Daly, and I'm learning her story, and my mouth's just falling open, and I'm reading about her. And then I find her letter of application to the school. And it was truly her words that so moved me that I said, these women need a voice, and I'm going to give it to them, and I'm going to celebrate them through historical fiction. So I'll just read part of it to you because it's so eloquent, and to think that a 17-year-old woman wrote this. The determination which has brought me to your country against the combined opposition of my friends and caste ought to go a long way towards helping me to carry out the purpose for which I came, i.e. is to render to my poor suffering countrywomen the true medical aid they so sadly stand in need of, in which they would rather die than accept at the hands of a male physician. The voice of humanity is with me, and I must not fail. My soul is moved to help the many who cannot help themselves. And now I'm transported back to the 1880s, and I'm thinking of those women, and I'm thinking of the fear and mistrust that they had in their physicians, and that was just criminal to me, that they should be looking to those physicians to help them and care for them. And many times, their ailments would be dismissed or, just poo-pooed that, oh, it's just women's stuff, don't worry about it. Or other, procedures done because they thought they were going to cure them of their hysterics and everything. So I just am falling in love with this idea and decided, okay, I need to get to work. So how am I going to do this? Again, I have no writing background, maybe a couple of creative writing classes in high school, maybe college. So the first thing I do is think about, the setting, some of the themes I want. I know some of my character inspirations, but I still needed to pick the time period I was going to write about. And I could certainly have started with 1850 when the school opened and brought in my great-great-grandfather as one of the founders, or I could have said 1884 when Anna Daly was there and focus a little bit more on a biographical study of her. But I went back to, how did I get started on this journey? And I got started because I wanted to learn more about my grandmother. So I stopped and I thought of her timeline of life, born in 1879, died in 1957, and the incredible history that she lived through. Becoming a young woman in Philadelphia in 1897, becoming a young woman, early 20s at the turn of the century, and all that those possibilities then held for women as the suffrage movement is gaining power and involvement. Becoming a bride in 1912, the year the Titanic sank, becoming a mother in 1914 as World War I is getting underway. Having 2 young children when the Spanish flu hits in 1918. I just thinking, wow, as a history nerd, this is an incredible amount of information that I could weave into my story and use as anchors for how did those events affect everyday people as well. So I've got all my ideas and I'm ready to go, and I have dedicated the book to my grandmother. Again, I still don't know much about her. I do know she wasn't a doctor. I know she didn't go to medical school. So I just created one. So my main character is fictional, but she's inspired in part by my grandmother. So I've taken a creative writing class online, trying to strengthen my writing skills, and started my research, because writing historical fiction, I know I'm going to need a lot of research to give substance to the book and make people want to learn more about history just from my book. So I was very fortunate that there were a couple of great nonfiction books out about women in medicine. So I devoured all of those, sticky notes, Post-its all over the place, and then also turned to fiction, because I wanted to look as a new writer, who are the authors I admire, and what can I learn from their style of writing or from some of their themes in women's historical fiction. So one of my favorite novels is by Anita Diamant, The Red Tent. Not much to do with my setting, it's set in biblical times, but it had that very strong sense of community among women, and women coming together to support each other through life's trials, tribulations, and triumphs. Susan Meissner is another favorite historical fiction author of mine, and she had written a book in 2018, came out, so just when I'm starting my research in 2018, and it's all about Philadelphia during the Spanish flu. So I definitely know that Susan probably has done her research, and I was able to look at some of her resources and the way she presented Philadelphia during the flu. Just a side note for Susan, because I do adore every book she writes. She has a new one coming out, I think it's in 2 weeks, Only the Beautiful. And it sounds like a fascinating subject. It's about the eugenics movement here in the States. And then I was thinking, well, what would my characters be influenced by at that time? So I found The Awakening, that I had never read before, published in 1897. So certainly a book that a well-educated 18-year-old woman would want to pick up, if not for any other reason beyond the scandal that it was creating. And what better way to defy her mother than to read it under her bed covers at night. It's now considered one of the best precursors to modern feminist theory. In the novel, The Awakening is all about a woman awakening her own desires. Her desires to be educated, to be independent, to be an individual, and awakening her own sexual desires. That's what the scandalous part was about. Marital infidelity. So a lot of topics that weren't written or discussed in 1897. But the perfect book for me to look at to start to understand that concept of a new woman for the new century. And then, of course, I had to read some of my grandfather's books. Romance genre is not my favorite, but it was extremely helpful to read just if it was contemporary to that time of 1912, 1916. Dialogue, how do people talk? There was much more formal conversations back then. What were they wearing? How did they interact? So I got some great material from some of his books as well. So I've done a lot of reading, and now it's time to get a little closer to my material, and planned another trip to Philadelphia to Drexel, who houses all of the archives from women's medical. So I had a wonderful day in their basement office. They pulled out a cart of materials for me. So I was able to see photographs and correspondence, and who wants to guess what expenses were for medical school in 1897? Tuition? See, I fooled you. I am asking a question of the audience. $135. So I think we've had a little bit of inflation since then. God help anybody that has anybody in medical school or even college today. I'm glad my bills are done and loans are on my kid. And thank you that they don't even have to pay those right now. But of course, then beyond your tuition, there are all those little hidden fees they never tell you about. So everything like the 50 cents to use the library, to use the reading room for the year, or rental of your bone box. So each student had to pay $5 at the beginning of the academic year, and they got their bone box, which had a skull and about 15 to 18 different bones, so that between the 40 students, they could assemble 2 whole skeletons. So I've been doing this talk at a lot of libraries since the book released in August. And I was up in Wayland in December, and there's an older woman in the audience. Her daughter had brought her. And so I get to this slide, and I'm starting to talk about the bone box. And she goes, "Oh my goodness." What's wrong? Well, she had introduced herself to me. And she was a 1962 graduate of the Women's Medical College. And she goes, "I had a bone box in 1962, and she was shorter than me. And she goes, and I got the femur. And my box was like this big, and I had to walk around campus with it." So she was just lovely, and it was such an honor to meet her that she had come out. You know, she was well into her 80s. I was trying to quickly do the math. Okay, graduated medical school in 62. It's 2022. So yeah, but just a lovely woman, and definitely a pioneer in her day as well. So I'm getting ready to wrap up my day, and the archivist says, I've got one more thing I want to share with you and show you. I think you'll be interested. And he pulls out leather-bound books that were the original Board of Trustees meeting minutes from 1850. And I start to open them with my white gloves on, and I'm starting to read the hand script. And I discover that the first 6 years were all signed by the board secretary, William Shannon Pierce. So I did not know really what his involvement was. I had just seen that one line. For all I know, he could have been a benefactor, and they had said he was a founder. But he was obviously very involved, and I'm holding in my white gloves hands the books that he had transcribed in his hands. So that was just an incredibly special moment for me. So facts and figures and ideas running through my head, and the beauty of historical fiction is you have a little bit of liberty to have your characters become people with emotions and responses and depth than just writing a biography. So now I'm thinking, okay, I really need to learn more about women medicine because I don't have any background in medicine either. So I did find some current students in medical school that I could interview and survey and chatted with them. I even found an Instagram account, hashtag Women in Medicine. And it's mostly students who just put up posts of, you know, things they want to share so others know I'm going through the same thing as you. So again, that feeling of support and community. So just for fun, I pulled up a couple because I love them. But this one here, maybe she was born with it. Maybe it's hard work, determination, challenging her limits, getting knocked down, getting back up, ignoring her doubters, investing in herself, asking for help, and never giving up. And so I'm immediately thinking, you know what? If these medical students have these sentiments now, they must have been the same, if not even, you know, more pronounced in 1897, 1900. You know, that idea of caring and what you've dedicated to your patient, and even sexism. This one, was quite remarkable from a Dr. Samantha Bat-Rowden. She's from the UK. It happened. It finally happened. A man talked down to me about my specialist subject. He quoted a paper. I wrote the damn paper. And, then people started to post and saying, oh my goodness, yes, that happened to me. And this day and age, it's ridiculous. And someone then finally said, well, I hope you told him finally that you had written the paper. Oh yes, I did. And I put him out of his misery, and he had the good grace to look mortified. So good for her. But just the fact that in 2020, it's still happening. And then just for extra fun, because this one gets lots of gold stars from me, we have come a long way. A woman coming off of match season, and she's been matched to the hospital that she wants for her residency. And her husband's got the t-shirt that says trophy husband. So he's so proud of her. So yes, we have made strides. When my book takes place, again, only about 5% of all doctors were women, and it stayed flat at that number for a very long time. Now we're at about 36%. Of course, the number is a little bit higher in OBGYN and pediatrics, but 2020, we passed the mark that 50.5% of medical students are now women. So they'll be coming into the profession in just a few more short years. Okay, so I've written a book. It's December 2019. I have polished it. I've worked with an editor. I've had beta readers, preview readers give me feedback. I've gone back and edited to make it just as perfect as possible, that I feel satisfied that it's a good book. I think it's a good book. I think it's ready to find a publisher. So that's a whole nother arduous task for an author, is to find an agent or a publisher. So I'm starting to do my research, and it's January 2020 that I'm starting to do all that. And another book comes out, American Dirt. So I'm not sure if anybody has read this contemporary literary fiction. It was good enough that Oprah put her seal of approval on it. So what in the world could a book about the Mexican drug cartels and a woman fleeing from Acapulco, running from the cartels, and making her way north with her young son to try to cross the border? What does that have to do with historical fiction about women doctors? Well, shortly after the book was released, and after Oprah had already given it her blessing, the author, Janine Cummins, was accused of cultural appropriations. What gave her the right, as a non-Hispanic white woman, to write about the experiences of Mexican women and their experiences of trying to immigrate? I was able to sit in on a Zoom, because by then we're now in lockdown, and so everything's gone to Zoom. And I saw Janine speak, and she was asked about the situation, and she was quite emotional. She was even getting death threats for having written this and published this book. But she made the distinction. She did say that she does have some Puerto Rican heritage, but she does not necessarily identify as Latina. But she said, but I did my research. I went to Mexico. I interviewed women. I went to the border and interviewed, and I saw the conditions on both sides of the border. And I wrote this book. And my agent and my publisher thought it was a good book. And my publisher chose to publish it versus publishing a Latina author. So she goes, that wasn't me. I wrote the book. So, I mention all of this because now I'm kind of seeing what the environment is in publishing. Really triggered in part by this book. And I'm starting to now have doubts. What gives me the right to write about women doctors when I have no medical background at all. Even though I've done my research and I've surveyed and I've interviewed and I've followed Instagram accounts, how have I written a book that is true and authentic to the experiences of a woman medical student and doctor? So I've had a career in sales and marketing forever. And one of my best bosses I ever had in sales, I actually worked for the Walt Disney Company for 7 years. She always taught us, when you're facing your most difficult sale or client, just go for it. Just swing for the fences. You have nothing to lose, everything to gain. So I'm thinking, I need a woman doctor to read this manuscript. I don't know a woman doctor well enough that I could say, hey, here's 348 pages of a manuscript written by an unknown author with no writing background. I'm sure as a medical professional, you might have time to read it and give me detailed feedback. I didn't know anybody. So I swung for the fences and I sent an email to info@American Medical Women's Association. we're going all in or go home. So, and didn't even know who, but I said, this is what I've done. This is what I'm looking for. Maybe there's a retired doctor in the association that would be interested in reading. I'd appreciate any help or direction you could point me in. So for about 6 to 8 weeks, I was getting crickets in my inbox, nothing. And now I'm just completely stalled because I'm not sending this book out until I've had someone read it. Until I finally get a response, and it comes from Dr. Eliza Lochin, who says, okay, well, first of all, I'm intrigued because your main character's name is Eliza, but I am interested in reading your book, and if you want to send it on to me. And I said, oh my gosh, absolutely. Here is a practicing physician, mother of 3, and executive director of a national association, and she's agreed to read my book. And I'm like, you take as long as you need. I have no timeline. And she came back within probably about 8 to 10 weeks with detailed notes. Even though I had the medical scenes reviewed by a man from my writing group who's an ER doctor. So I got the medical scenes right, but she did give me some great tips and ideas of how to go a little bit deeper or what to avoid or what to play up. So I am forever grateful to her. I actually spoke with the National Association over Zoom 2 weeks ago after their annual meeting, and that was a thrill to have, I think we have about 80 women on the call. Okay, so I'm going to read you a short passage from the book because I think it sums up some of those sentiments about women in medicine, what they face, some of their challenges, as well as that supportive environment that I was going for. And some of the history of the time as well. So it's actually, the scene is based on a real life experience from a Dr. Mary Bennett Ritter. She actually went to medical school out in California. And in her autobiography, she describes this type of a scene. So I've kind of massaged it to fictionalize it a little bit, but the inspiration of the passage comes from her. So it's December of 1899, and my character Eliza and her classmates have been informed that they're going to be attending a surgery to observe, which would be very common, of course, for medical school. But male students from Jefferson Medical were going to be in attendance with them. And there were very few co-educational classes. So that was quite a novelty. So before they're walking into the operating theater, another one of my characters says to Eliza and the group, "We need to watch each other too. If you see anyone wavering, pinch her or something. We can't give these Jefferson blockheads any fodder to think we don't belong in the operating room as much as they do." Down the line in domino fashion, every women's med student took up the woman's hand on either side of her. They trained their eyes forward to the table, following the lamp's lighted path. The first incision started below the inner edge of the patient's eye and continued along the nose line to his lip. A wave of nausea enveloped Eliza. She gritted her teeth as she felt her body sway. Averting her eyes from the table, she watched a Jefferson man slump to the floor. She turned back to the surgery unfolding before her. One of the surgical residents peeled back a flap of skin as Dr. Palmer snipped the tendons. Eliza gripped Edith's and Olga's hands tighter. They returned the pressure. Another Jefferson student dropped. Out of the corner of her eye, she glimpsed an ashen pallor creep across Olga's face as her grip weakened. Eliza pinched the fleshy underpart of Olga's forearm. "Ow!" Olga exclaimed. Eliza ignored the cry. The blood returned to Olga's face. By the end of the surgery, beneath their jacket sleeves, bruises and welts from pinches and crescent moon-shaped imprints from fingernails appeared as medals of valor. The gusty mid-December air brought cooler temperatures for the evening. The women leaned into each other, drawing upon the warmth of sisterly friendship and strength. In 16 days, a new year, a new decade, and a new century would dawn. 1900 promised possibilities. Eliza and her classmates would define a new woman. Independent women who strove for more and achieved more. They would become doctors. An enlightened century of medicine would emerge. The time had arrived. So, I'd just like to tell anybody interested in genealogy or family research, dive in. You never know what you might find. There might be some ancestors you don't want to claim as part of your family, but you might just find something that sparks your interest. Maybe you want to write a book. You don't have to, but for me, it was just so rewarding, all the information I learned, not just about the judge, but other members of the family too, that I can now pass on down to my kids, because I never heard this from my dad. And so now my son Pierce knows more about the Pierce family history. So I just find it fascinating and encourage everybody. And we have so many resources available to us now, from libraries to Ancestry to archives. It's all right there at your fingertips if you just want to dig a little bit. So happy to answer any questions, even from Mike. Any questions? I do have a website. I heard from Danielle that a copy of the book is on order, so it will be put into circulation here soon. I do have some copies for sale here. It's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. You can ask any independent bookstore to order it for you. But there's more information on my website about the book, about what I'm working on next. I have a newsletter sign up. So thank you all so much. And again, any questions? Happy to spend a few more minutes. Yeah.
How hard was it to find that agent and that publisher?
Extremely difficult. Publishing is a dark, nasty world. Especially for first-timers, especially if first-timers of a certain age. When, to be honest, an agent will look up your bio and say, okay, woman of this age versus somebody who's in their early 30s. How many more books am I going to get out of them, realistically? So it was tough. And it didn't help matters that I finally started the agent search, because the large publishers won't look at you without an agent. So the Simon & Schusters and Random Houses, they won't even look at you. And an agent, just getting through to them in their inbox, magnified with difficulty when you're now living through a pandemic. And like everyone, so many people in every profession, checked out, checked down, shut down. I thought I'd have a slam dunk because one of my classmates from Wheaton is a literary agent in New York, the big firm. I thought, I'll just send this to Sally, she'll take care of me, no problem. And she was very honest. She came back to me and she goes, I can't. My mind is just not there. All I can manage right now is the existing roster of clients I have, and I wouldn't do justice, to selling your book. So I'll pass. So I did finally, I knew I didn't want to self-publish either, which people can do, and many people have done it very successfully, but it was just like one more thing to have to try to learn. And I did find Black Rose Writing. He was a small independent press. You can just submit your overview information through their website. They will then, if they're interested, ask for your full manuscript and take you on without an agent. So I was very fortunate that they liked the manuscript. But this was all, I heard from them in September of 21, signed my contract by November. They couldn't get me onto their calendar until August of 22, because they only publish about 80 books a year as a small publisher. So it's, it's not for the faint of heart, but if you believe in what you have created, and you've gotten the feedback that validates you, then just keep trying, because one way or another, you can get it done. Yeah.
So you mentioned you had help from your book club.
Yeah.
Do you recommend a new author that, if they're not in a book club, to get anyone?
Absolutely. Definitely you need feedback from readers. So my own in-person book club was my first round of beta readers, we call them. So they gave me feedback of what they liked, what they didn't like. This doesn't make sense. This is not plausible. So I could make some changes to the plot, really, and massage the characters more. But after them, because they're some of my closest friends, and you can't rely just on your closest friends who may not give you the real critical feedback because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So I did go out to a broader group of other writers that I had met through writing conferences and writing groups that I've been in. It was important that I did have some men read. One of the first readers and one of my first editors was one of my brothers, because he was the English major. And I presented him my pages with a box of red pens and a bottle of red wine. I said, go at it. And he calls me after about 8 pages in. Is this what chick lit is all about? Do we need 3 paragraphs about the dress? I'm like, yes, we need at least 2 paragraphs about the dress, because my audience is women. So they want to know about the dress. And he goes, and is every male character despicable? I'm like, no, keep reading. So I did have 2 other men that I met in writers groups read for me as well. And they knew the importance of giving critical feedback, because they would want me to do the same for them.
And were you in book club before you decided to become an author?
Oh gosh, yes. Oh yeah, I've been in, I lived in Norfolk for 22 years, and I was in a book club. I'm still in it. I still travel up once a month. So we've been meeting over 20 years together, and now I'm in another one. I live now on Cape Cod. I'm in one down there, and I'm in a Zoom one that has people from all over the country and Canada, and we read just historical fiction. So yeah, I mean, it's not, it depends on what genre you're writing in. So you don't have to be in a book club, but finding the right beta readers is definitely a must. Yeah.
So your next book, I assume there is a next book after all of the ups and downs and effort and all of that of doing historical fiction. Is that what you're sticking with?
I am, because I love it. And one of the best pieces of advice I got at a writer's conference was, my original intent was to be the full timeline of my grandmother's life up to 1957. And so I'm at this conference and I'm talking to some agents and editors and just telling them about what my book is about. And they said, you know what? That's too long of a time period. You are not going to do justice to that much history in a 350-page book. It's going to have to be 900 pages, And no one is going to spend their time or money on a 900-page book from an unknown author. You know, Ken Follett can get away with it. Diane Gabaldon can get away with it, but not Janis Robinson Daly. So,
Not yet.
not yet. Thank you, Paul. So they said, so chop your book off at a logical stopping point and set your readers up for a sequel. So the good news is I already have quite a few chapters already written that were in the drawer, but I've had new ideas since then, so now it's weaving them all together because there's still a lot more to be told, and even about other women in medicine in the early 1900s and other health issues, and again, the history, you know, living through the Depression as my grandparents did and my parents grew up in, living through a world war and serving in the world war as my dad did. And what did that look like for a mother who's at home that has 2 sons in the service, her only 2 sons. So there's a lot more to dive into for that. Great. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Danielle Cook. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Hopkinton Public Library, and I'm here with my colleague Jack Miller, our teen librarian. We're here to invite you to join us for our reading marathon.
For our reading marathon, simply log 26 hours of reading or other activities in minute increments, and then you'll be able to join us from our trip from Hopkinton to Boston, reading the whole way. Visit our website to sign up for a registration link as well as more details.
Did you know only 34% of children are highly resilient? That means 66% of kids aren't able to cope with and quickly overcome challenges. These findings come from the Cigna Resilience Index, the largest U.S. survey on resilience. Unfortunately, challenges facing children are on the rise. From academics to sports to social pressures, our kids are facing adversity at an alarming rate. For example, social media has changed the way children communicate. This can negatively impact children's confidence and perceptions of themselves. That's why raising a resilient kid is more important than ever. The MRP Project's Raising Resilient Kids program is for parents who want to ensure their child can positively and productively overcome life's obstacles. The series lays the foundation for resilience by arming parents with the tools needed to help kids cope with adversity.
In the 6-week series, we'll highlight the essential role obstacles play in children's development. The facilitators discourage parents from trying to fix problems. Instead, we discuss specific behaviors, thoughts, and actions to help children work through specific situations. We'll provide strategies that can be used to help deal with similar situations in the future. We also spend time during the first couple of sessions discussing ourselves and our own resilience. This is an important aspect to our curriculum, as it is critical for us as parents to be resilient. We can't expect our children to be resilient unless we're modeling resilient behaviors for them. Each class focuses on one topic, and the facilitators provide time for problem solving and group discussions. Participants can support each other, share lessons learned, discuss experiences, and learn from one another.
One of our recent participants said, and I quote, "Raising Resilient Kids was a wonderful series that I am so happy I had the opportunity to participate in. Through this series, I gained new strategies to work with my own children through situations that in the past have felt overwhelming to me. I walked away from this series with new language to use with my children and to help guide them through situations they may encounter in everyday life growing up. I am truly grateful for the discussions, encouragement, and guidance that this series provided. I'd encourage any parent to participate in the MRP's Raising Resilient Kids. If you want to sign up, please visit the mrpproject.org/raisingresilientkids.
The Sustainable Green Committee is a group of 15 people working hard to help Hopkinton address the serious environmental issues facing us. We develop plans and practical solutions to help save not only our special slice of the planet, but also help save residents, businesses, and municipal organizations money. Double green power. This includes a municipal aggregation plan, so our electricity comes from green supplies, a climate action plan to help us meet the state's net zero carbon emissions target, and so much more. We also provide useful information on green topics. Our website, hopgreen.org, aims to be a one-stop spot for links to some of the best resources out there on solar, EVs, waste reduction, heating, and safe natural resource management. Our social media and email lists help to keep anyone who wants to be informed about everything we're doing, as well as the latest green news. We're always looking for help, so contact us if you'd like to work on this important mission. Thank you.
Solar power is a free gift from the universe. You'll be very surprised at how many programs there are that offer rebates and information for you to save money on your business and your home. You owe it to yourself to find out more information. Go to the website www.mass.gov/solar-information-programs. Many businesses around town are already taking advantage of solar power. Ask your neighbors what they think. You're saving money and you're saving the planet. Life doesn't get more simple than that.
Hi, my name is Danielle Cook. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Hopkinton Public Library, and I'm here with my colleague Jack Miller, our teen librarian. We're here to invite you to join us for our reading marathon.
For our reading marathon, simply log 26 hours of reading or other activities in minute increments, and then you'll be able to join us from our trip from Hopkinton to Boston, reading the whole way. Visit our website to sign up for a registration link as well as more details.
At the Hopkinton Public Schools, safety is our first priority. Our students need to feel that they are safe before they can begin learning and growing. As part of our commitment to safety and security, people who need to conduct business at our schools should go to the main entrance, press the buzzer, and explain the purpose of your visit. Wait to be admitted and do not hold the door for those behind you. Other than the main entrance, all other entrances are locked for security.